My family always saw me as the black sheep. To finally prove it, my perfect brother hired a private investigator to dig up my failures. The joke was on him when the PI didn't find dirt, but a multi-million-dollar tech empire he never knew existed. The confrontation that followed destroyed everything. The 3-hour drive from Austin to my hometown in Ohio is a journey through time, but not in the nostalgic way people write songs about. It's a regression. I leave my clean, minimalist townhouse, get into my 10-year-old Lexus, a car I keep because it's reliable, not because it's impressive, and watch as the landscape flattens and the colors fade. The vibrant, chaotic energy of the city gives way to the muted grays and browns of the Rust Belt. Hope and ambition are replaced by a quiet, settled decay. With every mile, I feel like I'm shedding a layer of my own skin, reverting to a version of myself I've spent the last 20 years trying to escape. Julian, the CTO, dissolves. In his place emerges Julie, the name my father still calls me, the sensitive, awkward kid who was always a disappointment. The family home hasn't changed. It's a shrine to a specific kind of past, my brother Greg's. The living room walls are a museum of his achievements. There's the photo of him in his high school football uniform, grinning after winning the state championship. The plaque for Salesman of the Year from the local car dealership where he's worked since he was 22. A framed newspaper clipping about him leading a charity drive. My contributions are conspicuously absent, unless you count the awkward school photos my mother insists on keeping on the mantelpiece, where I'm all braces and bewildered eyes. I walk in and the Sunday ritual begins. The air is thick with the smell of my mother's pot roast, a scent that's supposed to mean comfort, but for me, it smells like obligation. Julian, you're here, my mother, Mary, says, wiping her hands on her apron. She gives me a quick, bony hug. You look thin. Are you eating properly in that city? Or just playing those computer games all day? I manage a smile. I'm eating fine, Mom. I don't mention the tasting menu I had at a Michelin-starred restaurant with a venture capitalist last week. It wouldn't compute. My father, Frank, grunt from his armchair, the local newspaper spread across his lap. Julie, traffic bad. It was fine, Dad. Then Greg arrives, the conquering hero, with his wife and their 2 boisterous sons who immediately start chasing each other around the furniture. Greg is 40 but carries himself with the unshakable confidence of the high school quarterback he once was. He claps me on the shoulder, a gesture that's meant to be brotherly, but feels more like an assertion of dominance. Hey, little brother, he says, his voice booming. Still saving the world one bite at a time? We sit down for dinner, and the performance begins. My father complains about the new supervisor at the plant he retired from 5 years ago. My mother sings Greg's praises, recounting a story about how he charmed a difficult customer into buying the most expensive truck on the lot. He's just got away with people, she says, beaming. Always has. The implication hangs in the air, as it always does, away with people that I, the quiet, introverted one, have always lacked. Then, the spotlight turns to me. It's my turn to be dissected. So, that little computer company you were with, Greg starts, leaning forward with a look of practiced concern. You said they got bought out? You get anything from that? I keep my answer vague. Yeah, it was a good deal. I did okay. Good, he says, nodding as if he's my financial advisor. He takes a sip of his beer. You know, I was talking to Bill at the dealership. We might have an opening in the back office, doing inventory, that sort of thing. It'd be a real job, you know, stable, with a 401k. I could put in a good word for you. It's time you settled down, Julie. A man needs roots. My parents nod in unison. He's just looking out for you, dear, my mother says. I feel the familiar heat rise in my neck. A real job, as if the last 15 years of my life have been a fantasy. I want to scream. I want to tell them that the little company was sold for 9 figures. That my okay buyout made me a multimillionaire before I was 35. That I'm now the chief technology officer of a cybersecurity firm that protects the data of Fortune 500 companies. That the project I just greenlit has a budget larger than the annual revenue of Greg's entire dealership. But I don't. I just stir my mashed potatoes and say, thanks, Greg. I'll keep that in mind. The lie tastes like ash in my mouth. But it's a taste I'm used to. It's the price of admission to this family. To keep the peace, I have to let them believe I'm the failure they've always seen me as. The black sheep who validates my brother's brilliant golden fleece. And as I sit there, listening to Greg talk about his new boat, I feel a chasm open up between my life in Austin and this suffocating reality. It's a chasm so wide, I'm afraid one day I won't be able to make the journey back at all. Monday morning is a baptism. The moment I step into the sleek, glass-walled lobby of my office in Austin, the weight of Ohio sloughs off me. Here, I am not Julie. I am Julian Miller, the CTO of Axiom Security. People don't look at me with pity. They look to me for answers. My day starts with a stand-up meeting in the main conference room, a space with a panoramic view of the city skyline. I'm at the head of a long table, surrounded by a dozen of the sharpest minds in the industry. We're discussing a persistent threat from an Eastern European hacking collective that's targeting one of our major financial clients. They're using a polymorphic variant of the malware, says Lena, our lead threat analyst, pointing to a complex string of code on the main screen. It's rewriting itself every 12 hours. Our standard heuristics can't keep up. I listen, absorbing the data. The room is quiet, waiting for my take. The Julian from yesterday's dinner table would have shrunk under this pressure, mumbled something incoherent. But this is my domain. It's a distraction, I say, my voice calm and clear. The malware is noisy on purpose. They want us chasing this ghost. Where are we looking? Check the client's internal API logs. I bet they're not trying to break down the front door. They're looking for a key someone left lying around. The team's energy shifts. There's a murmur of agreement. They see the logic. I spend the next hour directing the response, delegating tasks, my mind moving with a clarity and purpose that feels like a foreign language in my parents' house. Later that afternoon, I have my weekly video call with my therapist, Dr. Anya Sharma. Her face appears on my screen, her expression warm but analytical. She's the only person who knows about both Julians. "How was the visit?" she asks, getting straight to the point. I lean back in my leather office chair, the view of the city sprawling behind me. The usual, I say, a bitter smile on my face. Greg offered me a job doing inventory at his car dealership. They think I'm one bad month away from living in my car. And how did that make you feel? Like I was suffocating. Like I was an actor in a play I never auditioned for. The worst part, Anya, is that I play along. I nod, I smile, I let them believe it. Every single time. Why do you think you do that? It's the question we always circle back to. I stare out the window at the cranes dotting the skyline, building a new Austin, because I remember what happens when I don't. And just like that, I'm no longer in my high-tech office. I'm 12 years old, standing on the sidelines of a muddy football field. It's the regional semifinals. Greg is the star quarterback. My chest is tight, each breath a painful, wheezing struggle. An asthma attack, a bad one. I'm trying to get my dad's attention, tugging on his sleeve, but his eyes are locked on the field, on Greg. "Not now, Julie," he mutters, shrugging me off. "Your brother's about to score." Greg throws the winning touchdown. The crowd erupts. My parents are screaming, hugging. I'm gasping for air, my vision starting to tunnel. I remember sinking to my knees in the wet grass, the world going gray around the edges. Nobody noticed until after the celebrations were over, until after they'd finished congratulating my brother. I spent that night in the hospital. The next day, my dad told me I needed to be tougher. I recount the memory to Dr. Sharma, my voice hollow. "So you learned that your needs were secondary to your brother's accomplishments," she says gently, "and that your reality was less important than the family's narrative." Exactly. And the narrative is that Greg is the sun, and the rest of us are just planets orbiting him. "So, I'll ask again," she says, her gaze steady. "What are you afraid would happen if you corrected the narrative? If you told them the truth about your life, your success?" I look at the picture on my desk, a photo of my business partner David and me, moments after we sold our first company. We look so young, so tired, and so happy. Honestly, I say, I don't know what's worse, the thought of them still not caring, or the thought that they would suddenly start caring, but only about my money. The silence that follows is heavier than any line of code. It's the central vulnerability of my entire operating system, The one bug I've never been able to patch. The catalyst, when it finally comes, isn't a dramatic confrontation. It's a casual Tuesday afternoon phone call. I'm in my kitchen, making coffee, when Greg's name flashes on my phone. My stomach tightens reflexively. I let it ring twice before answering, forcing a neutral tone. "Hey, Greg. What's up?" "Hey, little brother. Just call and check in," he says. His voice has that smooth, practice quality he uses on the sales floor. The "I'm your buddy, but I'm also in charge" voice. "So, I was thinking more about our conversation on Sunday." I brace myself. "Oh yeah. About that money you got from selling your little computer company. You know, Mom and Dad worry about you. We all do. You're smart with computers, sure, but the real world, it's different. It's sharks out there, Julie." I can almost see him leaning back in his office chair at the dealership, feet up on the desk, playing the part of the wise older brother. "I appreciate the concern, Greg, but I'm doing fine," I say, my grip on my coffee mug tightening. "I'm sure you think you are," he says, and the condescension drips from every word. "But I've been talking to my guy, my wealth manager. He handles all my investments. He's the best. What I was thinking is, why don't you just wire that money over to me? I'll put it into my portfolio under my management. That way it's safe. It'll grow properly. I won't even charge you my guy's full fee. Call a family discount." I'm silent. The audacity of it is breathtaking. He's not offering advice. He's offering to take control of my money. Money he has no concept of, from a success he refuses to acknowledge. As if I'm a child who just found a $100 bill on the sidewalk. He thinks I sold a garage startup for $50,000. "Greg," I star, my voice dangerously quiet. "That's not going to happen." He laughs, a short, dismissive bark. "Don't be proud, little brother. There's no shame in admitting you're out of your depth. People like you're good at the tinkering, the ideas. But the execution, the real-world stuff, that's for people like me. I don't want to see you blow it all on, I don't know, vintage video games and action figures." And that's it. That's the moment something inside me, something that has been dormant and suppressed for decades, finally cracks. It's not just the insult to my intelligence. It's the casual, complete erasure of my entire adult life. He doesn't see a CTO, a successful entrepreneur, a man who built his own world from nothing. He sees an incompetent child, a project, a failure he needs to manage for his own sense of superiority. The line from my therapy session comes back to me, sharp as a shard of glass. The narrative is that Greg is the son, and I realize with a sudden, chilling clarity that he will do anything to keep it that way. He needs me to be a failure. My success isn't just an inconvenience to his worldview. It's a threat. "I have to go, Greg," I say, my voice tight. "Just think about it, Julie. It's the smart play. Don't let your ego get in the way." I hang up without another word. I stand in my kitchen, the afternoon sun streaming through the window, and I feel a cold fury spread through me. It's a feeling I haven't allowed myself to experience in years. For my entire life, I've played the part they assign me. I've absorbed the condescension, swallowed the insults, and retreated into my own world. No more. The unspoken truce is broken. He didn't just insult me. He declared war on my reality. And for the first time in my life, I decided to fight back. The fury from Greg's call didn't fade. It simmered, a low-grade burn beneath the surface of my skin for the rest of the week. It was a distraction I couldn't afford. I was in the middle of closing a major deal with a European logistics company, and my focus was shot. I kept replaying his words in my head, the sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it all. It felt like more than just a condescending phone call. It felt targeted, calculated. The proof arrived on a Friday evening. I was on my couch, laptop open, trying to unwind by browse a forum for rare synth collectors. An email notification popped up from the credit monitoring service I use, a high-end one that tracks more than just standard inquiries. The subject line was bland, "New activity on your report." I clicked it open, expecting a routine alert. Instead, my blood ran cold. Alert type, full background inquiry, level 3, initiated by North Star Investigative Solutions, Columbus, Ohio. I'd never heard of North Star Investigative Solutions. A level 3 inquiry wasn't a simple credit check for a new credit card. It was deep. It pulled employment history, property records, public records, potential criminal history, the works. It was the kind of check law enforcement or high-level corporate security might run, or someone hiring a private investigator. My first thought was identity theft. My mind raced through security protocols, potential breaches. But something fell off. The timing was too coincidental. "It's sharks out there, Julie." Greg's words echoed in my head. This was his doing. I knew it in my gut with a certainty that was absolute and terrifying. He wasn't just offering to manage my money. He was actively digging into my life, trying to find proof for the narrative he'd constructed. He was trying to find the dirt, the debt, the failure that would justify his condescension and prove to our parents and to himself that he was right about me all along. The irony was so thick I could choke on it. My entire career was built on digital forensics and tracking ghosts in the machine. And my own brother, a glorified car salesman, thought he could investigate me without me knowing. The fury returned, but this time it was sharp and focused. It wasn't a hot, blinding rage anymore. It was a cold, methodical anger. I carried my laptop to my office, the one room in my house that was all business. I sat down, my fingers flying across the keyboard. This wasn't my day job, but the principles were the same. I was hunting. I started with the PI firm, North Star Investigative Solutions. A quick search of Ohio business records gave me their incorporation documents and the name of the principal owner. It was a small-time operation, likely a couple of ex-cops. Then I went deeper. I ran a script to cross-reference public data breaches for any mention of the firm or its employees. Nothing. They were clean, or at least careful. But they had to get paid. And Greg was arrogant, not stupid enough to use his personal credit card. I shifted my focus to the dealership, Miller & Sons Luxury Auto. I accessed publicly available records, looking for vendor payments. It was a long shot, a digital needle in a haystack. But Greg was cocky. He'd feel secure using his corporate resources. After an hour of digging through payment processing portals and cross-referencing vendor codes, I found it. A digital breadcrumb. A payment made 3 weeks ago to NIS LLC for consulting services. The amount was $3,500. It was routed through the dealership's corporate Amex card, the one Greg, as sales manager, had signatory authority on. I leaned back in my chair, the screen glow illuminating my face. There it was. Concrete proof. He had used his company's resources to hire a private investigator to dig into my life. He was trying to orchestrate an intervention, to gather ammunition for an ambush where he would expose me as a fraud and a failure in front of our entire family. A wave of nausea washed over me, followed by that same cold, hard anger. This was a violation on a level I couldn't have imagined. He hadn't just crossed a line, he'd burned the entire bridge. And as I sat there, in the quiet of my office, a new, dangerous thought began to form. The PI works for whoever pays them. And I had a lot more money than Greg did. The next morning, I woke up with a singular, crystalline purpose. The shock and nausea had solidified overnight into a hard, dense resolve. Before I did anything, I made one call. David Chun answered on the second ring. "Julian, it's Saturday. Don't tell me the European deal is on fire." David was my former business partner, my mentor, and the closest thing I had to a brother who actually respected me. We'd been through the trenches together, building our first company from nothing in a cramped apartment that always smelled like stale pizza and solder. He was retired now, living on a ranch 2 hours outside of Austin, happily raising horses. "The deal's fine," I said. "I need to run something by you. Something personal." I laid it all out for him. The years of condescension, Greg's phone call, the credit alert, the PI firm, the payment from the dealership's account. I spoke in a flat, emotionless tone, recounting the facts as if I were delivering a security brief. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of wind. "Jesus, Julian," David finally said, his voice low. I don't even have a word for that. Vile, I guess. That's one word for it," I said. "So what are you going to do? Confront him? Tell your parents?" "No," I said, the word coming out sharper than I intended. "They'd just spin it. They'd say he was worried about me. They'd make him the hero of the story, like they always do. I'm done playing defense. I took a breath. I'm going to hire the same firm, David. I'm going to have them investigate Greg. Another silence, this one heavier. David was a pragmatist. He wasn't prone to emotional reactions. You're talking about pouring gasoline on a fire, he said carefully. He already lit the match. I countered. He thinks his life is perfect. He's built his entire identity on being the golden boy, the success story, while I'm the weirdo failure. He's investigating me to prove it. I want to know what's really behind that perfect facade. I want to see the truth. And what if you find it? David asked. What's the end game, Julian? To humiliate him at the next family dinner? To blow everything up? You need to think about what you'll do with the information, whatever it is. I know, I said, though I wasn't sure I did. Right now, I just want a weapon. I'm tired of being the only one in the room who's unarmed. David sighed. It was a sound of resignation, of a friend who knew he couldn't stop a freight train. All right, I get it. I don't like it, but I get it. Just be careful. This kind of thing, it can poison you too. It's a little late for that, I said. After hanging up with David, I walked back in my office. The sun was streaming in, but the room felt cold. I pulled up the website for North Star Investigative Solutions. It was cheap, generic, full of stock photos of men in suits shaking hands. I found their number and dialed. A gravelly voice answered on the third ring. North Star. Yes, I said, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. I'd like to inquire about your services. I could feel my heart pounding, a slow, heavy drumbeat in my chest. This was a point of no return. I need a comprehensive financial and personal background report. The subject's name is Gregory Miller. That's Greg. He's a resident of Northwood, Ohio. I imagine you may already be familiar with the name. They were professionals. I'll give them that. The man on the phone didn't even flinch. There was a brief pause, the sound of a keyboard clicking, and then his gravelly voice came back. We can accommodate that request, Mr. Miller. We pride ourselves on discretion. I almost laughed. Discretion. He said it as if he weren't actively taking money from two brothers to investigate each other. But I wasn't paying him for his moral compass. I was paying him for his data. I gave him my information, authorized an amount that was 5 times what Greg had paid, and specified that I wanted the report delivered via an encrypted, single-use channel by the end of the week. He assured me it would be done. The next 5 days were some of the longest of my life. A strange sense of dread and anticipation settled over me. I went to work, I led meetings, I wrote code, but my mind was elsewhere. I was waiting for the other shoe to drop, a shoe I had paid to have drop-kicked at my own brother's head. David's words echoed in my mind. This can poison you, too. I pushed them away. This wasn't about poison. It was about antidote. It was about leveling a playing field that had been tilted against me since birth. On Friday afternoon, the email arrived. The subject was a random string of numbers and letters. The body contained a single link and a one-time password. I took my laptop, went into my office, and closed the door. My hands were trembling slightly as I clicked the link and entered the password. The report materialized on my screen, a sterile, multi-page PDF. The first page was a summary. The rest was the raw data. I started reading, and the world fell away. It was so much worse than I could have possibly imagined. The image of Greg, the pillar of the community, the successful family man, didn't just crack. It vaporized. The report detailed his finances first. The big house he was so proud of was leveraged to the hilt. He had the original mortgage, of course, but he also had 2 subsequent home equity lines of credit, both maxed out. It was a house of cards financed by debt. His credit report was a sea of red. Maxed out credit cards, a car loan for his wife's SUV that was almost as much as the vehicle was worth, and, most damningly, a series of outstanding federal tax liens. He hadn't been paying the IRS. He owed them nearly 6 figures. But the financial disaster was just the beginning. The personal background check was a graveyard of secrets. There were 2 DUI charges from his late 20s that had been pleaded down to reckless driving, sealed from public view, but not from a Level 3 investigation. There were multiple domestic disturbance calls to his address over the past 5 years. No charges were ever filed, but the call logs noted verbal altercation and property thrown. The perfect marriage was a performance. The final nail in the coffin was a Child Protective Services file. It was from 2 years prior. A person of concern, report filed by a teacher at his oldest son's school, citing erratic parental behavior and verbal aggression. The investigation was closed as unsubstantiated, but the file itself was a scar, a permanent record of his instability. I leaned back in my chair, my breath catching in my throat. I had gone looking for a crack in the armor. I found a man who was rotting from the inside out. All the boasting, the condescension, the need to see me as a failure. It wasn't just about protecting his ego. It was an act of desperate misdirection. He was projecting his own catastrophic failures onto me, because facing them himself was unbearable. I had expected to feel a sense of triumph, of vindication. But I didn't. I just felt sick, a profound, hollow sickness. The weapon I had wanted was now in my hands. It wasn't a pistol, it was a nuclear bomb, and I had no idea if I had the strength or the cruelty to use it. The Sunday drive to Ohio felt different this time. The dread was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was overlaid with a tense, hyper-aware vigilance. The report was a toxic asset, a file burned into my brain. I felt like I was smuggling a bomb across state lines. My plan, if you could call it that, was simple. I would wait. I wouldn't fire the first shot. But if he came at me, if he tried to start his ambush, I would be ready. I walked into the house, and the wrongness hit me immediately. It wasn't loud or overt. It was the silence. The oppressive, judgmental atmosphere I was used to had been replaced by a strange, unsettling quiet. My mother greeted me at the door, and her smile was strained. "Julian, you made it." It was the same greeting as always, but her eyes darted around nervously. My father was in his armchair, but he wasn't reading the paper. He was just staring at the television, which wasn't even on. He looked up as I entered and gave me a curt nod, but there was something else in his eyes. Not disdain, something I couldn't identify. Was it respect? Then I saw Greg. He was standing by the window, looking out at the backyard, his shoulders slumped. He heard me come in, but didn't turn around. His wife was in the kitchen with my mother, and their conversation was in low, anxious whispers. The usual boisterous energy of the house had evaporated. It was a tomb. We sat down to dinner. The surreal performance began. My mother placed the best cut of the roast on my plate, a gesture usually reserved for Greg or my father. "So, Julian," my dad said, clearing his throat. It was the first time he'd initiated a conversation with me about my work in probably a decade. "Mary tells me you're what is it? A CTO now?" I looked at him, then at my mother, then at Greg's back. He still hadn't moved from the window. And then, with a horrifying, sinking certainty, I understood. The PI had reported back to Greg. He had told Greg that he hadn't found a deadbeat living in a rundown apartment. He had found a multi-millionaire CTO with a pristine credit score and a portfolio of successful investments. Greg, in his panic or his arrogance, had told our parents. The shift in the room wasn't because they suddenly saw me. They saw my success. They saw my money. This wasn't a prelude to an ambush. This was the ambush, but it wasn't the one I had prepared for. They weren't here to call me a failure. They were here to welcome their long-lost, successful son into the fold. They didn't know that I knew they'd been investigating me, and they certainly had no idea that I had done the same to them. I was holding a royal flush, and they thought they were just starting a new, friendly game. A cold, hard calm settled over me. I was no longer on the defensive. I was in control. I picked up my fork and knife. "Yeah, Dad," I said, my voice even. "CTO, it's a lot of work, but it's rewarding." The game had begun. The dinner was a masterclass in familial whiplash. The conversation, for the first time in my life, revolved around me. My father asked questions about cybersecurity, his brow furrowed in concentration as he tried to grasp concepts he'd dismissed as computer games for 30 years. My mother kept refilling my glass, telling me how proud she was, how she always knew I had it in me. It was a dizzying, nauseating performance. Through it all, Greg was a ghost at the table. He picked at his food, his knuckles white where he gripped his fork. The mantle of Golden Boy had been lifted from his shoulders, and he seemed to be collapsing under the weight of his own gravity. The family's sun had been eclipsed, and he was lost in the sudden darkness. I could feel his resentment radiating across the table, a palpable, toxic heat. He couldn't stand it. The entire family hierarchy had been upended, and his silence was the sound of his world breaking. He finally snapped about halfway through the main course. It was as if a switch flipped, a desperate, last-ditch effort to reclaim the spotlight. Speaking of rewarding, he blurted out, his voice too loud in the quiet room. Just closed the biggest deal of the quarter at the dealership. A fleet sale. 6 figures. The commission alone. He trailed off, puffing out his chest, looking around the table for the familiar nods of approval, the chorus of adulation he was used to. My mother obliged instantly. "Oh, Greg, that's wonderful." My father grunted his approval. "That's my boy." Greg's eyes met mine across the table, a clear challenge in them. He was trying to reestablish the old order, to remind everyone who the real success story was. He was daring me to challenge him. I held his gaze. I felt no anger, only a profound, surgical calm. I put down my fork, took a slow sip of water, and gave him a small, polite smile. The smile of a man holding all the cards. "Congratulations, Greg," I said, my voice soft but carrying across the table. "That's fantastic news." I paused, letting the moment hang in the air. "I hope that helps." Greg's bravado flickered. "Helps with what?" "Well, with everything," I continued, my tone still light, conversational. "A commission like that must be a real relief, especially with the IRS liens. And maybe you can finally pay down that third mortgage on the house. That's ought to be stressful." Silence. It was absolute. My mother's smile froze on her face. My father's fork clattered onto his plate. Greg's face, which had been flushed with boastful pride, drained of all color. He looked like I had physically struck him. What are you talking about?" he stammered, his voice a choked whisper. "I'm just saying, it's great you're doing so well," I said, my voice hardening ever so slightly, the politeness falling away to reveal the cold steel beneath. "It's tough out there. A lot of people are stretched thin, living beyond their means. It's good to see you're turning things around." Every word was a precision strike, aimed at the foundations of his carefully constructed lie. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't angry. I was simply stating facts, and the quiet truth was more devastating than any shouted accusation could ever be. I had taken his reality, the one he had hidden from everyone, and laid it bare on the dinner table like a dissected frog. His perfect world, his perfect life, his perfect marriage, all of it was a lie. And now, everyone knew that I knew. The golden boy was a fraud, and the black sheep was the one holding his secrets. Greg stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air. The shock on my parents' faces was curdling into confusion and dawning horror. They were looking back and forth between us, trying to process what was happening. "Julian, what is the meaning of this?" my father demanded, his voice a low growl. "What nonsense are you spouting?" "It's not nonsense, Dad," I said, turning to face him. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a single-page summary of the PI's report. I hadn't planned on using it, but now the game had changed. I slid it across the table toward Greg. He knows what I'm talking about. Greg looked at the paper as if it were a coiled snake. He didn't touch it. "You're lying," he finally roared, slamming his fist on the table. The dishes jumped. His sons, who had been quiet in the corner, started to cry. "You're making it all up. You're just jealous. You've always been jealous of me." "Jealous of what, Greg?" I asked, my voice still level. "Your debt? Your tax problems? Or of the domestic disturbance calls?" That was the one that broke him. His wife, who had been silent until now, let out a small, strangled sob and buried her face in her hands. My mother shot to her feet. "Julian, that is enough. How could you? This is your brother. You don't air family business like this." "Family business?" I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You want to talk about family business? Let's talk about the private investigator Greg hired to dig up dirt on me. Did he tell you about that part? Or did he just tell you that your deadbeat son suddenly struck it rich?" My father's face went slack. My mother looked at Greg, her eyes wide with a new, dawning horror. "Greg? Is that true?" Greg couldn't answer. He was trapped, cornered. And then the final, ugliest truth came out. It came from my mother, her voice trembling, not with anger at Greg, but with a desperate, pleading fear aimed at me. "He was just worried about you," she cried, tears streaming down her face. And we were worried about him. Greg told us things were difficult. We knew. We thought, she faltered, looking from my face back to Greg's. Her voice dropped to a near whisper, a conspiratorial, shameful confession. "We thought, now that you have money, you could help your brother. He's your brother, Julian. Family is supposed to help family. Why wouldn't you tell us you were successful? We could have avoided all this. You could have just helped." And there it was. The final, brutal revelation. It wasn't about love. It wasn't about respect. It wasn't about pride in my accomplishments. From the moment they found out about my success, their minds had gone to one place: utility. I had transformed from the family failure to the family ATM. My success wasn't something to be celebrated. It was a resource to be exploited, a solution to the problem of Greg. The last flickering ember of hope I might have held, that deep down they might actually love me for who I am, was extinguished in that moment. It was replaced by a cold, vast emptiness. I looked at their faces, my father's stunned silence, my mother's tearful avarice, my brother's shattered pride. These were strangers. They were strangers bound to me by blood, but strangers nonetheless. I pushed my chair back from the table, the legs scraping against the hardwood floor. The sound was unnaturally loud in the suffocating silence. I was done. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to salvage. As I stood up, my father found his voice. It was hoarse with a rage born of shame and thwarted expectation. "So that's it? You just blow up your family, throw this filth in our faces, and walk away?" He stood as well, his face red. "You can sit there on your pile of money while your family is struggling, while your own niece needs help." He gestured toward my sister, Chloe, who had been a silent observer through the whole nightmare, huddled at the far end of the table. "Chloe's youngest. She needs surgery for her hearing. Insurance won't cover all of it. But you wouldn't know that, would you? You're too busy, too important." It was the final, desperate gambit. The emotional blackmail. The last-ditch effort to paint me as the villain, the cold-hearted monster who hoarded his wealth while a child suffered. I looked at Chloe. Her eyes were filled with tears, but she wouldn't look at me. She just stared down at her hands, twisted in her lap. Her silence was her answer. She was a willing pawn in their manipulation. Had they even told her they were going to use her daughter as a weapon against me? Or was she in on it too? In that moment, it didn't matter. A weary calm washed over me. The anger was gone. The hurt was gone. All that was left was a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. I turned back to my father. My voice was quiet, almost gentle, but it cut through the tension like a razor. "You're right, Dad," I said. "I didn't know about that." I let the words hang in the air for a second before delivering the final blow. "But let me ask you something. What exactly did you think I could do to help?" He stared at me, confused. "What do you mean? You could pay for it." I gave a sad, small shake of my head. "No. I mean, what did you think my resources were? Up until an hour ago, you thought I was still working at a comic book store." I looked around the table, at each of their stunned faces. A store, by the way, that closed down in 2011. You thought your son, the family failure, the one who plays with computers, could somehow magically solve your problems. I picked up my car keys from the sideboard. The small metallic jingle was the only sound. This was never about help. It was about control. And it was never about family. It was about appearances. I walked to the door, not looking back. This was the last Sunday dinner. I opened the door and walked out into the cold Ohio night, leaving the ruins of my family behind me in a house that was no longer my home. The 3-hour drive back to Austin was the loneliest I've ever known. The fury and adrenaline from the confrontation had faded, leaving a vast, hollow ache in their place. There was no sense of triumph, no feeling of vindication. I had won. I had exposed all their lies and hypocrisy, and all I felt was the profound, crushing grief of losing something that I now realized I had never truly had in the first place. I was mourning the ghost of a family, the idealized version I had carried in my head for years, the one I had kept hoping would one day magically appear if I was just good enough, or quiet enough, or successful enough. When I got back to my silent townhouse, the first thing I did was call David. It was past midnight, but he answered immediately. "You're back," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm back," I confirmed, my voice cracking. "Don't say anything," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "Just get some sleep, if you can. We'll talk tomorrow." I hung up, grateful for his understanding. I didn't sleep. I just sat in my dark living room, watching the city lights flicker, feeling like an astronaut who had cut his own tether, floating in an infinite, silent void. The next day, I had an emergency session with Dr. Sharma. I recounted the entire dinner, my voice a flat monotone. When I finished, I finally broke. The tears I hadn't shed in the car, the anger I had suppressed, the grief I had been holding at bay, it all came pouring out in a raw, ragged wave. I destroyed them, Anya. I choked out between sobs. I took a bomb to my own family. She let me cry, waiting patiently until the storm subsided. When I was done, she spoke, her voice full of a compassion that felt like a lifeline. "Julian," she said softly, "you didn't plant the bomb. You only exposed the one that had been ticking for 30 years. You're not grieving the family you destroyed last night. You're grieving the family that was never there to begin with. The family that made your value conditional, first on your failure, and then on your wealth." Her words cut through my guilt. She was right. My victory didn't feel like a victory because it wasn't a conquest. It was an escape, an amputation. It was painful and ugly, but it was necessary for survival. "What do I do now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Now," she said, "you begin the work of building your own life, on your own terms, completely free of their narrative. Now you get to decide who Julian Miller really is without their ghosts in the room." That evening, I did something I should have done years ago. I went into my phone, and one by one, I blocked their numbers. My father, my mother, Greg, even Chloe. With each press of the button, I felt a pang of guilt, immediately followed by a surprising, liberating lightness. It wasn't an act of hate. It was an act of self-preservation. It was the first brick in a new foundation. The months that followed were quiet. The absence of the Sunday ritual left a void in my weekends, but I slowly began to fill it. I filled it with long hikes in the hill country outside Austin, with reconnecting with old friends, with late nights in my office working on projects I was passionate about, not for the money, but for the sheer joy of creation. The silence from Ohio was absolute. I didn't cut myself off from my family's bloodline entirely. Through a lawyer, I set up a blind educational trust fund for all my nieces and nephews, including Chloe's daughter. It would pay for their college and any major medical expenses, managed by a neutral third party. It was my one, final, untainted gift to them, a way to help the children without getting entangled in the toxic games of the parents. My lawyer informed me that Chloe had cried when she received the paperwork. She sent me a single, hesitant email. "Thank you, Julian. I'm so sorry." I read it, acknowledged the flicker of connection, and then deleted it. It was enough. Life began to feel simpler, lighter, without the constant weight of their judgment. I found myself more open, less guarded. I started having lunch with a colleague from work, a brilliant data scientist named Maria. She was funny and sharp, and she had a kind, perceptive gaze. She saw me for who I was in the here and now. My past was a story I told her, not a cage I lived in. One evening, we were walking by the lake as the sun set, turning the sky into a brilliant canvas of orange and purple. The famous Austin bats were beginning to swarm from under the Congress Avenue Bridge. "You seem happy," she said, bumping her shoulder against mine. I thought about it for a moment. The grief for my lost family hadn't vanished completely. It was a faint, silvery scar, a part of my history, but it no longer defined my present. "I am," I said, and the truth of it surprised me. "I think I am." "Do you ever regret it?" she asked gently. "What happened with them?" I watched the bats swirl into the twilight sky, a chaotic but beautiful dance. "I regret that it was necessary," I said, choosing my words carefully. "I regret that I waited so long to realize that my value wasn't determined in a dining room in Ohio. But I don't regret choosing my own future." That night, I understood that I hadn't lost a family. I had escaped a system of control. The real work, the real joy, was in building a new one. A chosen family, built not on obligation or blood, but on the bedrock of mutual respect, shared laughter, and a quiet, unconditional acceptance. Looking at Maria, at the city lights twinkling around us, at the new, open horizon of my own life, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The road ahead was unwritten. There would be challenges, of course. But for the first time, I felt like I was the one holding the pen. And I was finally ready to write the next chapter.